Chapter 1. The last trail. Alex tightened the straps of his worn backpack as he stepped onto the narrow Montana trail, the snow crunching beneath his boots with a brittle sound that echoed in the quiet valley. He paused, looking up at the towering Rockies whose peaks were already brushed with fresh powder and mist. The winter air was sharp, slicing into his lungs with every inhale, but it carried a thrill he had always sought in these mountains. He took out his small leather-bound journal, opened it, and wrote every heartbeat is a victory. The words felt hollow and powerful at the same time, a mantra he had repeated on every solo trip, reminding himself that survival was not just about muscle or skill, but about believing he deserved to see another sunrise. The trail was deceptively calm at first, the snowflakes falling lazily from the gray sky, dusting his shoulders and settling on his dark hair. Birds chirped occasionally in the distant pine trees, but their songs were muted, almost melancholy. Alex knew these woods. He had explored sections of the Rockies before, but each year brought new challenges, and the winter had a way of transforming familiar paths into treacherous landscapes. He had studied the maps, marked his route, and calculated the expected time for each checkpoint. Yet the thrill of being alone, relying only on instincts and experience, filled him with a dangerous mix of confidence and overexcitement. Hours passed and the trail began to narrow. Snow fell thicker, frosting the branches into crystalline sculptures, and the wind whispered ominously through the trees. The silence was almost unnatural, pressing in from all sides. Alex paused again, checking the markers. A ridge that should have been to his right was obscured, hidden under a thick sheet of ice and snow. The trail markers, which were supposed to guide him, seemed buried, forgotten by time and weather. He hesitated but moved forward, trusting his instincts over the unreliable signs, the journal clutched tightly in his gloved hand. Every heartbeat is a victory, he wrote again, his breath forming clouds that hung in the frigid air. The sun, weak and low in the sky, barely lit the trail, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. He passed a small stream, its water half frozen, and the sound of running water was a fleeting comfort in the otherwise oppressive quiet. Then he saw it, a large fallen pine tree, its trunk split and hollowed by age, stretching across the path. He swung his leg over carefully, feeling the icy bark cut through the fabric of his gloves. His boots slipped slightly, sending a shiver down his spine, but he regained balance. Yet a gnawing unease had begun, a feeling that something was off, that the mountains were watching, assessing. By late afternoon, the snowfall became heavier. Visibility dropped to a few yards, and the trail that had seemed clear now vanished under a white blanket. Alex's pace slowed, each step a cautious negotiation with slippery ground and hidden crevices. He tried to maintain calm, recording notes in his journal about the snow conditions, tree formations, and direction, but the entries became shorter, rushed, anxious. Every heartbeat is a victory. He repeated it over and over, his own lifeline against creeping fear. Then came the first real warning. A distant crack echoed through the valley, resonant and sharp, like the roar of some unseen giant. He froze, straining his ears. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by a sharp gust that whipped snow into his face, stinging like needles. Alex pressed against the nearest tree, surveying the surroundings. No animals, no movement, only the relentless white and the wind. His heart rate climbed. The Rockies were beautiful but merciless, and he had crossed into a territory that required more than skill. It demanded respect and humility. Night fell faster than expected. The gray sky darkened into an oppressive, slate canopy, and the temperature plunged. He realized he had lost the trail markers completely. The path he thought he knew no longer existed. Panic threatened to set in, but he forced himself to breathe, taking deep, deliberate inhales, pressing the journal against his chest. Every heartbeat is a victory. He reminded himself of this simple truth as he scanned the area for shelter. A hollow near a boulder caught his eye, partially hidden by snow, and he approached it cautiously. The wind howled through the mountains, bending the branches, creating grotesque shadows that danced across the ice. Inside the hollow, he found enough space to huddle, but it offered no protection from the cold that seeped into his bones. He struck a flint and finally coaxed a small flame from the dry twigs he had collected. The fire sputtered and died repeatedly, forcing him to start over multiple times. Each attempt drained his energy, his fingers numb and blue. Shadows outside seemed to move with a life of their own, the wind creating shapes that resembled figures watching him. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but the laughter stuck in his throat. Alone in the Rockies, with the storm intensifying, even imagination could become a threat. Alex curled up near the fire, wrapping himself in every layer of clothing he carried, pressing his journal close to his chest. He wrote once more, "Every heartbeat is a victory," and added a line about family, the warmth of home, and the comfort of familiar faces. The fire flickered and hissed, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch infinitely into the darkness. Outside, the storm whispered promises of challenge and survival, daring him to endure, to face the mountain's test. Alex closed his eyes, listening to the wind and the subtle shifting of snow, realizing that the mountain had claimed many before him and would continue to do so. Yet he clung to hope, clung to the mantra that had carried him this far. Hours dragged into night, each minute a battle against cold, isolation, and the creeping terror that solitude brings. His mind drifted to memories of family gatherings, laughter, the simple act of a warm meal, a bed that did not bite back. Every heartbeat is a victory, he repeated silently, a fragile thread anchoring him to life. Sleep threatened, and with it the danger of unconsciousness in the freezing cold. He fought it, rocking gently, humming tunes from childhood, anything to maintain awareness. Outside, shadows twisted into monstrous shapes. The wind howled in a way that seemed almost human, but he reminded himself that fear was a tool as much as a hazard. By the time he finally allowed a few minutes of rest, the snow had thickened, blanketing the forest in a white so complete it seemed to swallow sound, light, and time. Alex understood he was no longer hiking for pleasure or adventure. The mountain had shifted the rules. It demanded vigilance, ingenuity, and the unyielding will to survive. Every heartbeat is a victory. He whispered it again and again into the hollow night, the words a talisman against the creeping dread. He did not know what lay ahead, only that the next step, the next breath, the next heartbeat must be faced with courage. The Rockies loomed large, indifferent, their peaks lost in storm clouds, their secrets buried under snow and ice. But Alex, though small and vulnerable, was resolved to endure. Chapter 2. The isolation. The morning arrived pale and cold, with a gray sky that pressed down on the mountains. Alex forced himself to rise despite aching muscles and numb fingers. The fire had died overnight, leaving him shivering and wrapped in layers that barely held warmth. He scanned the hollow for anything useful, bits of bark and broken branches. Littered the snow, he realized he was truly alone. There was no sound of birds or animals, only the soft whisper of wind brushing across the snowfields, and the occasion groan of a distant tree bending under the weight of ice. Every heartbeat is a victory, he wrote hastily in his journal, glancing at the gray light. Filtering through the cave entrance, he knew he could not stay long in the hollow if he wanted to survive. He stepped outside carefully, the snow biting into his boots. The world was transformed from the familiar trail into an endless white labyrinth. The trees were skeletal, their branches reaching like fingers across the sky, and the footprints he had left yesterday were already disappearing under new layers of snow. Panic pressed against his chest, but he forced himself to breathe. He had training and experience, but this was different. He was truly isolated, and the mountains were indifferent to his struggle. He kept moving, checking for landmarks, the frozen river from yesterday, the large boulder, and the hollow he had used for shelter. Nothing looked recognizable. The snow and fog erased all memory of direction. Hours passed. As he trudged through knee-deep snow, each step required concentrated effort. He tried to ration his energy and stay calm, but hunger gnawed and his fingers lost sensation. Despite thick gloves, he remembered survival strategies from books and previous hikes. He collected branches and needles from evergreen trees to reinforce his hollow. If needed, he found a partially collapsed rock crevice and decided to examine it. Inside, he discovered remnants of previous travelers, a tattered backpack, a rusted thermos, and a boot that had long rotted. These relics spoke of lives that had faced the same mountain and did not leave unscathed. A chill ran down his spine, not just from the cold, but from the thought of those who had come before and never returned. Alex struck flint against stone over and over, finally coaxing a flame from dry bark. It sputtered and died several times, forcing him to start over, each failure sharpening the awareness of how fragile his survival was. Smoke curled upward and mingled with the snowfall outside, making shapes that seemed almost human in the shifting light. He kept writing in his journal, "Every heartbeat is a victory," and added a note to himself about family, the warmth of home, and the promise to endure. He wrapped himself near the fire, drawing what comfort he could from the meager heat. Shadows outside moved with the wind, playing tricks on his eyes. Shapes that might have been animals or fallen branches took on monstrous forms, and Alex knew the mind alone could become a threat when left to dwell in isolation. As the day wore on, he tried to forage through the snow, searching for edible plants or frozen berries. The cold was relentless, and his hands lost all feeling, forcing him to stop and warm them near the fire. The wind increased, and a strange howl carried across the valley, a sound that was not entirely animal nor entirely natural. It made the hairs on his neck stand on end. He crouched lower near the fire, his heart hammering, but he refused to let fear dominate. "Every heartbeat is a victory," he whispered aloud, to reclaim power from the terror creeping in his thoughts. Drifted to family, his mother laughing in the kitchen, his sister joking on the phone. Memories that were warmth he could not touch, but could remember and cling to. Night fell faster than expected. The hollow offered only partial protection. The wind screamed through the rocks, the snow piling against the entrance, forming jagged shapes that blocked light and distorted sound. Alex felt trapped inside a frozen tomb. He forced himself to move the heavier snow from the entrance, keeping access open and maintaining a fire that was barely alive. The shadows cast by the flickering flames created monsters on the walls, twisted forms that danced and lunged. He knew his imagination was amplifying the isolation, yet each movement in the distance made his body tense. He clutched his journal, pressing it to his chest. "Every heartbeat is a victory," he wrote again, before letting exhaustion settle. But sleep was uneasy. The cold pressed into his bones, and nightmares crept at the edge of consciousness. Hours of fitful rest passed. He woke to silence broken by the occasional shifting snow and groan of ice cracking somewhere unseen. He inspected the hollow, found it intact, and began collecting water by scraping snow into a small tin. He melted it over the fire and rationed it carefully. The hunger pressed at him, and he knew that without food his strength would wane rapidly. He tried small movements, stretching muscles to maintain circulation. He kept repeating, "Every heartbeat is a victory," and pictured the face of his mother, the sound of his father's voice, the laughter of old friends. These thoughts anchored him against the slow descent into despair. As dawn approached, a gray light crept into the hollow. Alex stood and scanned the horizon. The snowfields were endless. The trees were black skeletal silhouettes against white and gray. The path he had taken yesterday was gone, erased by snow and wind. He knew he would need to leave the hollow soon and find a way to navigate the frozen wilderness. Each decision carried danger: stepping off a hidden ledge, slipping into a frozen river, or encountering wildlife was a risk that could end his life. Instantly, he clenched his jaw and adjusted his backpack, feeling the weight of tools and meager supplies. "Every heartbeat is a victory," he whispered once more, and stepped into the snow, knowing that the mountain tested both body and mind, and only relentless determination could preserve life. Chapter 3. The hunger. The snow pressed against Alex with a relentless weight, and the cold gnawed at his skin. He had moved for hours across the endless white landscape, each step more laborious than the last. His stomach ached from lack of food, and the small rations of chocolate and nuts he had brought were long gone. The frozen wilderness offered no mercy, and his eyes constantly scanned the terrain for any sign of life or shelter. "Every heartbeat is a victory," he wrote hastily in his journal. As he trudged through the deep snow, the track of animals crisscrossed the white ground, but none led to food. Small squirrels, birds, or deer had already vanished into the forests or buried themselves under layers of ice and snow. Desperation crept in. As he realized his energy was dwindling, frostbite was forming on his fingers, and toes the sensation of pins and needles spreading across numb flesh. He improvised a small fishing device using a broken branch, some thread, and a piece of cloth, attempting to catch anything beneath the frozen river ice. Cracked under his feet as he knelt, carefully cutting through the thin layer of frozen water. The water was frigid, seeping through his gloves and chilling him to the bone. He cursed silently, each failure weighing on him. Every heartbeat is a victory. He wrote again, pressing the journal against his chest, imagining the warmth of family and a meal that did not freeze the mouth with cold night. Approached quickly, the gray sky darkening into bruised tones. Alex knew that he had to find more substantial shelter. He stumbled upon shallow overhang in the cliffside, barely large enough to crouch under. The wind screamed past, carrying snow and ice with it, forming swirling ghost-like shapes. He built a small fire with trembling hands, striking flint repeatedly, until a flame took hold. The smoke rose into the night and cast dancing shadows across the cliff wall. The shadows seemed alive, moving like creatures he had never seen before. His imagination, stretched by exhaustion and hunger, began to twist every sound, every shape into something threatening. He ate the tiniest crumbs left in his backpack, savoring them with the desperation of a starving man. The taste was bitter, but sustenance nevertheless. He collected snow to melt for water, letting the fire slowly warm the hollow area around him. Every heartbeat is a victory, he whispered aloud, each word a mantra against the encroaching fear. He could hear distant howls of wolves or coyotes, or something else that was not identifiable. His ears strained, catching the slightest movements in the darkness, and he clutched the journal against his chest for comfort and courage. Memories of family and past adventures flooded his mind. He remembered summer hikes with friends, the laughter of a sister, the smell of a mother's cooking. The warmth of those moments contrasted brutally with the frozen nightmare surrounding him. He pressed his hands against his face and breath deeply, trying to anchor himself in reality. He recorded in the journal, every heartbeat is a victory, with extra lines about love, courage, and the promise to survive. The words felt almost like a shield against the cold, the isolation, and the growing panic. Hours bled into one another, and hallucinations began to weave into reality. Shadows stretched and twisted across the snow. Some seemed to reach for him. He thought he saw movement at the edge of the firelight, and flinched, ready to defend himself. The wind carried whispers in a language he could not understand, or perhaps it was just the mind playing tricks. The cold sharpened every sound, the crack of ice, the whistle of wind, every creak of the hollow. He fought against the fear. Every heartbeat is a victory, he repeated silently, grounding himself to the fact that survival was still possible if he remained alert and relentless. Alex ventured cautiously outside, seeking small game or edible roots under patches of frozen soil. His fingers numbed and his legs ached with every step. He set traps fashioned from broken sticks and twisted metal, hoping to catch a rabbit or other small animal. The forest remained silent, yet alive. Every crack of branch, every distant thump set his nerves on edge. He kept glancing behind, imagining shadows tracking him, watching, waiting. He knew the wilderness could not be reasoned with, only respected, and endured. The night deepened, and the blizzard that had begun days ago returned with renewed fury. Snow fell in sheets, obscuring every landmark, forcing him to hunker near the fire. He wrapped himself in layers, holding the journal to his chest. Every heartbeat is a victory, he wrote and repeated, thinking of family, love, and the world beyond the mountains. The hunger pressed against his mind, gnawing and relentless, making him weak and vulnerable. Yet he refused to surrender. He would fight hunger, cold, and fear with whatever wits and strength remained. By the first gray light of dawn, Alex had survived another night. He inspected his traps. Some had failed, others were empty. The small victories of keeping warm and sustaining life were precious. He looked across the snowfields and traced the river, trying to map a path forward. Every heartbeat is a victory, he wrote once more, and stepped carefully into the endless white landscape, knowing that the hunger was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and only total focus could carry him through. He kept moving, his eyes searching his mind, calculating each step, using every survival skill he possessed against the indifferent frozen world. Chapter 4. The storm. The sky darkened quickly with an unnatural speed, and the wind began to scream across the Rockies. Alex realized he had underestimated the mountain as he searched desperately for stable shelter. Snow whipped against his face, and the frozen ground threatened to swallow his boots at every step. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and each movement required extreme caution. Every heartbeat is a victory, he whispered aloud, clenching his fists around the journal. As he scanned the white void before him, he stumbled upon a shallow hollow beneath an overhang just large enough to crouch inside. The wind howled through the rocks like a chorus of voices, some mournful, some angry. Alex gathered every piece of dry wood he could find, striking flint, until a small flame fought its way to life. The fire flickered and sputtered under the assault of wind and snow, and Alex fought to shield it from the relentless storm. Every heartbeat is a victory, he wrote, forcing himself to focus on action rather than fear. The blizzard raged for hours, the snow piling outside the hollow, creating mounds that pressed against the rock walls like frozen sentinels. The temperature plummeted, and Alex could feel frost forming on his eyelashes and fingertips. His teeth chattered violently as he huddled near the weak fire, recalling every survival lesson he had learned in books, courses, and previous hikes. He dug deep into his mental reserves, drawing courage from family memories, laughter, and warmth that felt almost fictional against the frozen nightmare surrounding him. Hallucinations began to creep into perception. Shadows shifted across the snow outside in shapes too large and twisted to be animals. The wind carried voices, whispers, words he could not understand, or perhaps that were born in his mind. Every heartbeat is a victory, he reminded himself, gripping the journal tightly against his chest like a talisman against madness. The isolation and the cold pressed against his body and soul, threatening to break his will. Yet he forced himself to act, to think, to survive. Alex ventured out briefly to reinforce his fragile shelter and collect water melted from snow in a small metal container. He moved cautiously, each step a negotiation with ice and hidden crevices. The wind cut through his layers like knives, and he knew that exposure, even for a few minutes, could be deadly. He set small traps nearby for any small game, hoping to gain sustenance. The eerie howl of a distant wolf, or perhaps a mountain lion, carried over the wind, adding tension and fear to the night. Every heartbeat is a victory, he whispered repeatedly, grounding himself against panic. Sleep became a dangerous temptation as exhaustion and cold combined. His body ached, and every muscle protested, yet unconsciousness meant death. He shifted constantly, adjusting layers and poking at the fire to keep it alive. The wind rattled against the rock hollow, creating sounds like skeletal hands scratching at the walls. The shadows outside moved in impossible ways, each flash of white from the snowstorm creating monsters Alex could not ignore. But he forced himself to differentiate hallucination from reality, relying on the mantra that had kept him alive. Days seemed to stretch endlessly, the storm showing no mercy. Alex rationed every bit of food and water, carefully knowing that each calorie and ounce of hydration mattered. The hunger gnawed at him, the cold bit relentlessly, and the isolation pressed into the mind, until even the tiniest sound or movement seemed monumental. Every heartbeat is a victory, he wrote over and over in his journal, clinging to sanity through repetition. And ritual memories of family and warmth were the only solace against the relentless storm and freezing mountain landscape. He explored briefly, when the wind abated, only to find the world utterly transformed. Snowdrifts covered landmarks, footprints disappeared, rivers and rocks obscured by ice and snow. The mountain seemed alive, indifferent, and cruel, shaping his path according to whims of nature. Rather than logic, Alex adjusted his route constantly, each decision a balance between safety and necessity. Every heartbeat is a victory, he whispered for reassurance, stepping carefully through the white void and pushing forward despite weakness and fear. Night came again, and the storm showed no sign of ceasing. The hollow offered minimal protection, snow piled high outside, creating pressure on the rock walls. The fire sputtered, constantly threatening to die with each gust, and Alex had to shield it tirelessly. He recorded in the journal, every heartbeat is a victory, adding thoughts about courage, persistence, and the will to endure through horrors of isolation. The mountain loomed silent and terrible, yet he knew survival was possible only through vigilance and unyielding determination. Chapter 5. The fight. Alex woke to the brittle gray light of early morning, the storm from the previous days easing slightly, but leaving behind a transformed frozen wasteland. The snow was deeper than ever and the cold had burrowed into his bones. He knew that survival required movement and innovation. Every heartbeat is a victory, he whispered, pressing the journal tightly to his chest, drawing strength from the written mantra. He examined his hollow and realized it could no longer provide sufficient protection. He needed to construct a more resilient shelter in the open, using ice, snow, and rocks, improvising. As the mountains dictated, he worked tirelessly, digging trenches and piling snow to form walls. The construction was laborious, each movement exhausting. As frostbite began to claim fingers and toes, he struck flint repeatedly to light a small fire for warmth and cooking. Using the meager supply of dry wood he had gathered, the fire flickered violently in the wind, threatening to die with every gust. But he fought to keep it alive. Every heartbeat is a victory, he recorded in his journal, noting the pain, fatigue, and mental strain. Yet refusing to surrender, hunger pressed relentlessly against him, forcing him to take desperate measures. He set traps he had fashioned from sticks, rocks, and thread, hoping to catch small game. Every step through the deep snow was risky. Slipping into hidden crevices or falling into frozen water could end his life instantly. Yet he moved with a combination of caution and determination. He recalled techniques from survival manuals and improvised methods, drawing upon instinct, experience, and raw determination. Every heartbeat is a victory, he whispered, pressing on despite the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. The hallucinations returned stronger than before. Shadows cast by the wind twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed alive. Some appeared to move closer at the edge of firelight, while distant echoes mimicked human voices. Alex could feel fear creeping in the marrow of his bones, yet he forced his mind to focus on concrete tasks, reinforcing shelter, checking traps, and maintaining fire. The isolation was absolute, the mountains indifferent, yet he refused to succumb to despair. Every heartbeat is a victory became a lifeline, a tether holding him to reality and to the will to live. Night descended, bringing with it the terrifying clarity of silence. The wind slowed, but left behind the eerie creaking of frozen trees, the groan of ice shifting, and the occasional howl of a distant predator. Alex crouched near the fire, shielding it with makeshift walls of snow and ice. He chewed on a frozen morsel of chocolate, savoring it like a feast. The cold pressed relentlessly, forcing him to constantly adjust layers, shift position, and tend the fire. The mountain was a living challenge, demanding ingenuity and courage from anyone who dared to traverse it. Alex ventured cautiously outside the shelter in search of water, melting snow over the fire, and attempting to find any trace of game. The shadows of rocks and trees seemed to watch him, the wind carrying every sound in amplified form. Each step carried risk. The frozen river threatened to swallow him, the cliffs loomed, and the snowdrifts hid hidden dangers. Every heartbeat is a victory, he whispered aloud, the words echoing faintly against the mountainside, reminding him of the thin line between life and death. As exhaustion mounted, he faced frostbite, blisters, and muscle fatigue, the hunger clawing mercilessly at his focus. The hallucinations grew more vivid, shapes moving in impossible ways, and distant cries that might have been animals, might have been the mountain itself. Testing his resolve, he pressed on, methodically reinforcing shelters, checking traps, maintaining fire, and keeping a mental map of the terrain. Every heartbeat is a victory, he wrote in the journal, noting the struggle and triumph of each small victory that kept him alive. Hours became days, and the fight continued, each moment a battle against cold, hunger, exhaustion, and fear. Alex drew upon memories of family, warmth, and home, using them as armor against despair. Each task completed, whether a fire rekindled, a trap set, or a small morsel of food consumed, became a lifeline. He pushed past physical limits, dragging himself across snowfields, improvising tools, and using instinct to survive. Every heartbeat is a victory echoed in his mind, a mantra carrying him through the relentless fight that the mountains demanded. Finally, as the sky lightened faintly, he looked across the snowfields, the hollow, and the improvised shelter standing battered but intact. The mountain had tested him, stripped him to bare vulnerability, yet he remained alive. He took a moment, pressed the journal to his chest, and whispered, every heartbeat is a victory, acknowledging the brutal fight he had endured, and the will that had allowed him to continue. The frozen wilderness remained indifferent behind him, but he had survived its challenge and prepared for the final steps toward the return of light. Chapter 6. The return of light. The storm finally relented, leaving behind a landscape transformed and treacherous snow piled high across valleys and cliffs, the wind scattering patterns across ice, and frozen rivers. Alex emerged from the hollow, exhausted, battered, and nearly numb from frostbite. Each movement required monumental effort, every step a negotiation with fatigue and pain. Every heartbeat is a victory, he whispered, pressing the journal to his chest, drawing strength from the ritual that had carried him through endless nights and blinding snowfields. He scanned the horizon, the mountains looming vast and indifferent. The peaks were jagged sentinels, the valleys filled with shadow and snow. He forced himself to move, relying on memory, instinct, and the faintest signs of the trail. The blizzard had erased almost everything familiar, yet he used the frozen river as a guide, slipping carefully across its surface, testing ice with each step. The sunlight was weak and gray, but it cast a faint glimmer, providing orientation and hope. Every heartbeat is a victory, he recorded silently, imagining the warmth of home, the faces of family, and the embrace of friends he had fought so desperately to return to. Days of struggle had left him weak, his muscles trembling, his fingers and toes frostbitten. But the mental toughness that had seen him through storm, isolation, and hunger now pushed him forward. He rationed the last scraps of food, melting snow for water and maintaining a small fire. Whenever possible, the landscape remained silent, except for the distant groan of shifting ice and the occasional cry of wildlife. His hallucinations had lessened, yet shadows still seemed to twitch at the edge of vision, threatening to remind him of the fragility of life. Every heartbeat is a victory, he whispered, to reclaim control over fear and exhaustion. Suddenly, in the distance, a shape appeared, a helicopter moving low against the gray sky, its blades cutting through the cold air. The sight brought tears to Alex's eyes and renewed vigor to his limbs. He waved frantically, swinging journal above his head, hoping to catch attention. The machine hovered as voices called down commands and ropes were lowered. He felt the cold wind bite even more sharply, but the promise of rescue energized every aching muscle. The team pulled him into the harness and hoisted him upward. Every heartbeat is a victory, he shouted silently in relief and triumph as the ground fell away beneath him. Inside the helicopter, warmth and light wrapped around him like a balm. He could feel life returning to his frozen fingers and toes. The rescuer spoke kindly, offering water and blankets, yet he remained silent, eyes fixed on the mountains that had tested him beyond imagination. The Rockies loomed beneath him, vast, formidable, yet he had survived their challenge through instinct, courage, and sheer willpower. Every heartbeat is a victory, he repeated once more, recording the mantra mentally, a testimony to the endurance of the human spirit. Hours later, he arrived at the ranger station, the warmth overwhelming, the smell of fire and cooked food intoxicating. He collapsed into a chair, drinking water and trying to absorb that he had survived. The journal remained clutched to his chest. Every heartbeat is a victory, it whispered, and reminded him of the journey, every struggle, every night spent alone, fighting hunger, cold, fear, and hallucinations. His mind replayed each moment, the horror of isolation, the relentless storm, and the triumph of enduring through the fight. The reunion with family came hours later. Tears and embraces filled the room. Alex pressed the journal to his mother's chest, showing the mantra, every heartbeat is a victory. She held him close, whispering relief and pride. And he realized that the journey had changed him forever. Every heartbeat is a victory, he thought, reflecting on courage, resilience, and the fragile preciousness of life. The mountains behind him remained silent, holding memories and tests for those who dared to walk their paths. But Alex had emerged, transformed, aware of the depth of human endurance and the light that follows darkness. The documentary-style ending showed him years later returning to the Rockies with proper equipment, guiding new hikers, teaching survival and caution. His journal remained with him, recording the mantra, every heartbeat is a victory, as a legacy of endurance and hope. The frozen mountains remained majestic and indifferent, yet his story echoed across valleys, a testament to courage and survival against unimaginable odds. The aurora danced faintly above, casting ethereal light across the peaks, reminding all who watched that even in the harshest wilderness, life could endure and triumph.